All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Aquarium's Online Academy. My name is Talia. I'm excited to spend a little bit of my morning with you. So today, my friends, we're going to be talking about a very particular topic today. We're going to be talking about food webs today, kind of how lots of different animals kind of interact with each other, especially in terms of kind of who is eating who. So we'll try to figure out a little bit about what is hello fish? A little bit about what is a food chain, some examples of them, some of the components of them, um, and that's kind of my game plan for today for our chat. Um, you can tell that we are looking at one of our exhibits right now. This is Blue Cavern, and they kind of have some really interesting kind of dynamics there as well. So I wonder what a food chain in our kelp forest would look like. Now, if you are curious about anything during our program, if you're wondering about something, if you have some questions to ask, you are welcome to do that. You can interact with us two ways, depending on when you're watching us. If you're watching this live on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, you can text in your questions, and that phone number is down below on your screen. It is, there we go, 562-286-1838. If you're watching this later, after we've gone off the air, you can still ask us questions. We just ask that you email us instead, and that email address is also down below there. It is live at lbaop.org. So if you're watching this live Monday morning, text those questions in. If you're watching this after we've gone off the air, you're welcome to email those questions instead. So let's start off, my friends, with trying to figure out what is a food web. When we say a food web, kind of what does that mean? And sometimes I like to break it into something a little bit simpler. I think a lot of times when we start learning about this concept, we learn about a food chain, and that's kind of a little bit more of a linear representation of it. So one thing is eating one thing, is eating another thing. So I'm going to go over to my Explorer camera for a little bit, and I'm going to just kind of draw out a little bit about what I mean, because maybe that'll make a little bit more sense. So let's see. So sometimes when we think about a food chain, we're kind of having animal A eats animal B eats animal C. They might eat some plants too. So let's see. Maybe I'm going to have some kelp. I'll get some plants in here. I have some kelp or some seaweed. Actually, I can go back even further, because where does kelp get their food from? They're not eating hamburgers or pizza or ice cream. They're going to be getting their energy from the sun. They're not literally eating the sun, but they're using sunlight to photosynthesize and make some sugars and things. And that's going to help all their good stuff go through their body. All right, so we have kelp. And kelp is going to be eaten by let's say a sea urchin. And then a sea urchin is going to be eaten by an adorable sea otter. Kind of looks more like a cat right now, but that's okay. Art is a process. All right. And so sometimes we think about this a little bit more linearly. So one thing is eating another thing, is eating another thing, or is being eaten, I should say. So Kelp is being eaten by an urchin, which is eaten by a sea otter. And we think about this as a food chain. It's kind of one line of something eating something eating something. But our topic today is a food web. So this kind of gets into it by the fact that otters eat a lot of things. They don't just eat urchins. There are other things that eat urchins as well. So let's say a fish could also eat an urchin like a sheephead, and maybe that fish gets eaten by another fish, and that fish gets eaten by another fish, and then otters can eat a whole bunch of things as well. They can also eat sea stars and clams. So this is where it starts to get complicated. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see it. So this is where we start not having not just a food chain of like one line of things eating things, but it starts to kind of spider web out. And that's how we get to a food web. And what you might be starting to consider is that when you have a food web, when you have all of these different animals sort of interacting with each other and depending on each other for nutrients and food, and kind of everything is meshing together, balance is really important. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with some of my examples with my otter and my urchin. Balance is really important. When things start changing in this environment, because everybody's sort of relying on each other, things can get out of balance and out of whack really, really quickly when things start changing in here. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that these organisms and animals and plants that live within a food web or a food chain, they sort of have different roles to play. So one of the first types of organisms that are in a food web is you have things that are called producers, and that would be an example of kelp. And a producer is something that is sort of making its own food. The rest of my friends, like the urchin and otter and all the fish, these friends, these are going to be different types of consumers. So they can't make their own food. They are going to be having to hunt or find their food instead. I can jump back to some of my media just for a little bit, just so we're not turning this into a complete drawing class here. But yeah, let me put up a picture of, say, a producer. Maybe put up some pictures of some kelp, just to kind of get that image a little bit more in our brain. So I have my friend Sergio and Tina helping me out in the studio today. They're also going to be fielding your questions. Again, if you do have questions, if you're curious about anything, let us know. You can, again, text those questions in 562-286. There we go. 1838. All right, so kind of the one of the bases of the food chain in terms of the type of organism you might find there is a producer. So again, a producer is making its own food. That would be something like seaweed or kelp. I love this image as well because you have the beautiful sunshine streaming through the top, and that's how they are photosynthesizing, just like a plant or a flower or or a tree on land, they're going to be using the sunlight to make sugars and energy, and that's going to help all the good stuff in their body. So they're going to be making their own food. The same would be said for, say, plankton. There are plant plankton in the ocean in addition to animal plankton. Here's some really great examples. I love all the patterns you can find in plant plankton. It's so cool. You get all these really interesting kind of spots and dots and chains and sort of like little guys all linked together. They're so cool. So you have phytoplankton as well. Again, think kind of phyto might remind me of photosynthesis. They're going to be same thing, getting energy from the sun and producing their own food. That might be eaten by some plant plankton, or some, excuse me, this is plant plankton. Plant plankton might be eaten by some animal plankton or zooplankton. I like to think about, I find animals at the zoo, so that's how, ooh, little copepods. If this friend looks familiar, plankton from SpongeBob was based off of this particular plankton right there. That's called a copepod there. It does have one big red eye right in the middle of its forehead. But yeah, the plant plankton might be eaten by some zooplankton. And the zooplankton might be eaten by something that filters, maybe like a jelly. They might be eaten by a sea jelly. That sea jelly might be eaten by a lot of different things, but they might be eaten by, say, a turtle. And that turtle might be the end of the food chain there, or maybe it might be eaten by something a whole lot bigger, as one maybe like a big shark might eat a turtle every once in a while. So yeah, again, all these animals that maybe you don't think about sort of like connecting together, they do in terms of who's eating who. Consumers also, things that are kind of hunting or trying to find their own food, they can be broken down too in terms of kind of what they like to eat. You have carnivores that are going to be eating meat. You have herbivores, which are going to be eating mostly plants like algae. They're not exactly eating a salad. We would have a zebra shark, which would be an example of a carnivore. You also will have, and this would be an herbivore. I'm keeping my studio friends on their toes here. You can see that urchins love to eat kelp. That's one of their favorite snacks to eat. And then you have some friends who are omnivores who like to eat both. They like to eat meat and plants. I like to think of them as they are omnivores, and they like to eat a little bit of everything. So that can be, trying to think, that can be us, humans. That can be, actually there is a shark they discovered is an omnivore, the bonnethead shark, which is a cousin of the hammerhead as well. So yeah, it depends on kind of what different type of organism you're looking at. What they like to eat might tell you a little bit about what type of consumer they are. And again, these all link together in either a food chain, depending on if we're sort of zooming in on those relationships between animals, or a food web. If we're looking at a big picture, if we're looking at like a whole kelp forest, there's going to be all sorts of different animals that are going to be linking together. And like I said before, balance is going to be super, super important. When things are out of balance, ooh, here's that bonnethead shark. Their head's a little bit rounder than their bigger kind of great hammerhead cousins who head goes like way out to there. But yeah, they've discovered that they can not only eat meat and seagrasses, but they're actually drawing nutrients from the seagrasses. And that's kind of key, right? It's not just that I've put it in my mouth, it's that it's actually providing my body with some good stuff as well. So yeah, they recently discovered that bonnethead sharks can digest seagrasses and get nutrients from them, which is super duper cool. All right, so let's go through an example of sort of what happens a little bit when things might get a little bit more out of balance with, say, a food web. And one of I think the classic examples, the one that I typically go to, is that relationship we were kind of drawing out a little bit earlier of kelp, urchins, and otters. So sea urchins love to eat seaweed. They love to eat seaweed. They love to eat kelp. They especially love to eat the bottom, which is kind of an anchor point on kelp. It looks like roots. It kind of looks like a clump of spaghetti, but it's not drawing nutrients from the rocks underneath them, like, say, a tree would be drawing nutrients from the soil, or, excuse me, from the soil underneath them as well. So, instead, it's kind of just anchoring that algae into the rock. It's growing all the way up towards the surface from that. And like we saw with our blue cavern exhibit, it's providing a lot of different homes for a lot of different animals. Now, one of the things that loves to eat urchins are sea otters. Sea otters are really, really good at eating sea urchins. You can actually tell which otters, oh, they're so cute. You can tell which otters love to eat sea urchins because their teeth turn purple. Their teeth turn purple. Sometimes even their bones start turning purple just from all the pigment that's in the spines of the urchin. So I like to quote it, if you have ever had a lollipop or a popsicle when you were a kid, or maybe as an adult too, and your lips turn blue or your tongue turns blue and you go home and you're grown up, it's like, I know what you had for a snack. That's kind of what I think about when I have otters with purple teeth. I'm like, aha! I know that you really love urchins because you have some purple teeth going on over here. So they love to eat urchins. Ooh, that's a great picture of that holdfast right there. Boop, boop, boop. That is what the bottom of kelp looks like. And the urchin can kind of just kind of mow through that as it's munching on the kelp. I also want to point out really quick, this fish in here as well. This is a California sheephead. They have a really cool, strong mouth. They almost have, it almost looks a little bit, I don't know if they qualified as a beak like a parrotfish, but they have really good crunchy teeth. They are also really good at eating urchins as well. So they also play a role in helping keep that population in balance. So why I'm bringing this up is otters, as you probably know, are pretty fuzzy. They're pretty fuzzy. They're pretty furry. They're pretty adorable. But unfortunately, a lot of folks saw that fur and said, ooh, that would be great to have as a coat, as a hat, to help keep me warm. So we started hunting these friends a lot for their fur in the past. Now, there are protections in place. There was even way back in 1911, they put a treaty in place that said, hey, you can't take them for their fur anymore. We had more protections go in place in the 1970s. But what we realized what was happening was when there weren't a lot of otters anymore, there wasn't a lot of friends out in the oceans to eat those sea urchins. Because there wasn't a lot of friends to eat those sea urchins, the sea urchin population boomed. It exploded. There were so many urchins hanging out in the kelp forest. That balance wasn't in place anymore. So the urchins were like, woohoo, there's a whole bunch of kelp to eat. Mowed through the kelp forest, especially on the bottom, on that anchor point. All the kelp floated away. And then all the other animals that relied on them, like all the fish and the sharks and all the other different invertebrates, the sea stars, etc., they suddenly didn't have as plentiful of a home anymore. And they had to go find somewhere else to live. And they created what's called an urchin barren. So it's basically just sand and urchins and nothing else because they munched up all the kelp. So with those protections in place for the otters, they're actually what's known as a keystone species. So they play such a disproportionate role in terms of, I think it's how many there are versus all the good that they're doing. That balance started coming back into place. So as protections for otters went into place, we had more otters off of our coast. Because we had more otters off of our coast, we had more animals out in the ocean to help eat some more sea urchins. And because we had friends to kind of get that balance back into the kelp forest, we started to have much healthier, much more diverse kelp forests off of our coast. So, and again, balance is key. It's not just like, urchins are bad, they're eating all the kelp forests. Ooh, otters are good, they are eating all the urchins. It's having that kind of interplay and that balance kind of in check so that there's not too many urchins, but there's not too few urchins because they play a role in everybody else's diet as well. So balance came back to the kelp forest thanks to a lot of those protections that we put in place for our otters. Ooh, that's a great picture of what an urchin barren looks like. So yeah, not as cool as a kelp forest. Lots of urchins, a lot of sand, not a whole lot of everything else because all that kelp got eaten up by the urchins. Sea lions also play a role in sort of that kind of interplay of everybody hanging out in the kelp forest. I like to think of them using the kelp forest as an obstacle course right now. But yeah, everybody sort of has a role to play in terms of, again, who's eating who. They are a little bit more on the fish side of things. But yeah, they probably help keep some fish populations a little bit in balance too, because they love to eat some different types of fish. Excellent. And again, my friends, if you have any questions, if you're curious about anything, if you're wondering about something, if I've said something this morning and made you go, I want to know a little bit more about that, again, you are welcome to text those questions in. Again, that number down below is 562-286-1838. So please feel free to tune in and ask questions if you got any. I'm happy to give it a whirl and answer them if you're curious as best as I can. All right, so let me talk about one more kind of interplay in between different types of animals, and this is actually one that happens in the tide pool a little bit. And I don't think I asked my friends to pull up a picture beforehand. Can we get a picture of mussels up? Do we have some like tide pooly mussel pictures? Let's go see. If there isn't, that's okay. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. We can put up Coastal Corner for now. All right, so, because sea stars actually are the other part of this little bit more of a food chain. But our ochre stars, like these friends over here, our sea stars, are really, really good about eating a couple different things. But one of their favorite foods or types of food that they like to eat are shellfish. So things that are in hard shells, especially bivalves, things like clams. Clams and mussels. These friends over here, there's some barnacles, some acorn barnacles hanging out in these pictures as well. So the sea star likes to eat the mussels. They're not just like us when we, I don't know if you've had mussels before, they're delicious. They don't want to eat the shell. They don't eat all the yummy meat inside. So they're actually going to use their sticky tube feet to kind of give it a hug, open it up, stick their stomach in. They actually take their stomach a little bit out of their body. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of awesome. They will digest all that yummy mussel meat and swallow their tummy back. So they're really, really good at eating mussels. And they're kind of keeping that population in check too, especially on a tide pool. You can see that they're pretty they're got a pretty solid presence on these rocks. And like the kelp forest, you want to make sure that we have a healthy, diverse ecosystem where you don't just want like a few things hanging out there, because that's not as resilient as a place where you have lots and lots and lots and lots of different animals all hanging out together. So when things were affecting the stars, the sea stars, we had kind of a wasting disease that went up and down our coast. I want to say, I think we're still feeling the effects of it now, but it definitely happened in quite serious numbers a couple of years ago. All of a sudden, we didn't have a lot of sea stars in the tide pools. Because we didn't have a lot of sea stars in the tide pools, all of a sudden, you had a whole lot more mussels taking over all the rocks. Because you had a whole lot more mussels and things taking over the rocks, all of a sudden you didn't have as much space in the tide pools for some other friends to stick onto and live, like anemones and other stars and, ooh, what are these? Ooh, those are deep sea mussels. I forgot those existed. Those are cool. I don't know if there's deep sea stars keeping those in check, but awesome. I forgot there's deep sea mussels. That's awesome. And there's all these teeny tiny little crabs hanging out as well. Cool. That was a little detour. We just went way down into the ocean there. So that was your little detour. for the morning. Nice. So that's another example of, again, balance is key, right? So it's not that it's like Goldilocks conditions. It's not too many, it's not too little, it's just right, so that all that interplay, all those things depending on each other, depending on the next thing, depending on the next thing, depending on the next thing, that all kind of stays in balance. Here's another great picture of some barnacle friends here, and then we got some mussels kind of chilling in kind of the mid to top section. Up here, these kind of darker shells right here, those are some mussel friends. I think we got some more, those look like goose barnacles or fun. Some other friends hanging out there on the tide pool. So you might be asking yourself a little bit, what are some things that I can do to help out the ocean, to help, to help things out, and some easy things that you guys can do to help. One of the easiest things is just to share what you know, to share your knowledge. If more people are more informed, more knowledgeable about kind of things that are going on in the ocean, I think it's easier for them to care. It's easy once it's easier for them to kind of understand it and be like, ooh, this is important to you. I feel like this should be important to me. It's a lot easier to make those kind of better decisions about what are some things we can do to help out with our ocean. Those are little simple things you can do to help out. Some of the things I hope you're already doing, like picking up trash, recycling, all that good stuff. But yeah, sharing our knowledge is a great way to help everybody kind of learn a little bit more about the ocean. Kind of sharing that enthusiasm, I think, is a great way to help out as well. So we have a few more moments together, my friends. So again, if you have any last minute questions, I'm happy to answer them. 562-286-1838. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions before our time is up. But I hope you learned a little bit more about food webs. And again, that's kind of that spiderwebby big picture sort of look at how animals sort of interplay with each other, especially in terms of kind of who is eating who. So like we were saying before, it starts with their producers. It starts with things that are going to be able to make their own food. A lot of times those are going to be sort of our plant-like friends that are hanging out in the ocean. That would be, ooh, there's a shark there. Hi, shark. That is the consumer. That is not a producer. But I just wanted to point it out because they don't come by very often. Whee, there it goes. Anywho's, distracted by sharks. Algae, kelp, seaweed. That would be a producer. Same thing with all the itty bitty teeny weeny little phytoplankton hanging out in the ocean. That's going to be getting their energy from the sun, and producing all the good stuff in their body. That can be eaten by all sorts of different types of consumers. Anything from a sea urchin to a bonnethead shark eating seagrasses to little itty bitty snails that might be grazing on the rocks. They almost look like they're making little like garden paths in the rocks, eating algae. Those friends can be eaten by bigger things, bigger fish. Those friends can be eaten by even bigger fish. That bigger fish can be eaten by an even bigger fish. All the way up to some of the top friends that live in the food chain. Even like a big giant, maybe even like a big giant sea bass hanging out in the kelp forest. So everybody kind of has a role to play in their ecosystem. We talked a little bit about different types of consumers as well. So you might be categorized a little bit differently depending on what you'd like to eat. If you're a carnivore, eating just meat. An herbivore, eating just plant-like material. An omnivore, eating a little bit of both. And then we talked a little bit about some of the examples of that sort of big picture food chain, food web, and keeping that balance. So again, really, really important things to think about in our food webs and our habitats, our homes for our animals, how everything sort of interacts and relates to each other. We talked a little bit about our urchins, how they like to eat seaweed, and how otters like to eat urchins. And when that gets out of balance, when there's not a lot of urchins to eat, when there's not a lot of otters to eat urchins, all of a sudden you got a lot more urchins. Because you got a lot more urchins, you don't have a lot more kelp. And then all these other friends that call it their home. I'm going to get good at my backwards pointing today. All these other friends might not have as robust a home as they used to. So again, keeping that balance in check. Not too many, not too little. That in terms makes sure that you have a really healthy ecosystem to call your home. And we talked a little bit about an example in the tide pools as well with our mussels and our sea stars. So I want to thank you very much for spending a little bit of your morning chatting about food webs with me. I hope you had some fun. If you do have any further questions, we ask that you email us at this time just because we're going to be going off the air in just a moment. So you're welcome to email us live at lbaop.org. Also, if there are any school groups watching, if you wouldn't mind texting in the numbers of students that are watching with you, that just helps us get a little bit of a better gauge of our viewership numbers to help continue bringing these programs to you. You can text in those numbers to 562-286-1838. So again, thank you very much for joining us for another edition of our Aquarium Online Academy. I believe we'll be back on Wednesday with some more fun for you. So again, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.